So I wanted to start by thanking my family, my amazing parents, for not freaking out when I declared my art major and really fully supporting me through all of this journey, and obviously my amazing and wonderful friends and Davidson community. I could not have done any of this without y'all just like making such an amazing community for me to be happy and be a productive person. I wanted to give a huge shout out to the gallery staff, everybody who helped me put this on, all the amazing interns, for Anna and for Claire, and especially to Leah and Marissa and David for helping me put everything up. It was a huge task and y'all were so wonderful. And I really wanted to thank Natalie and Meredith for being here with me through this whole journey. Y'all know more than anyone how difficult it is, and y'all have been so sweet and wonderful and supportive. And of course, I have to thank our amazing professors. This art department is just so special and so unique, and I feel like each and every one of you really saw me where I was and saw what I needed to be doing, that I just wasn't doing enough, and really gave me a push. Thank you, Joelle. Thank you so much, John. And the biggest thank you I could ever give in my life to Katie. You've just I've bonded with you so much, and this journey has been so special. And I know that this collection would not be what it is if I didn't have you to really see what was in me and really just drag it out of me. And you're amazing and wonderful, and I thank you so much. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about me and who I am as an artist. So my name is Laura, and I am a senior art major at Davidson. No, I don't make the bar go. There we go. This is my collection, which is a culmination of all of my different coursework as an art major that I've done here at Davidson, entitled Goose Chase. It's all about kind of the pursuit of connection and romance and friendship, and how difficult those things can be in this time and in this generation where there's lots of disconnection, and there's a lot of people who don't want to engage in those types of relationships. And I am depicting these situations and these personal traumas, which I wanted to go ahead and give a little trigger warning that there will be some light mentions of sexual assault and emotional abuse. But I'm depicting those scenarios, and I'm using the tools that I use to get through those situations as a part of how I'm depicting them. So I have quite a spiritual relationship to nature, and particularly to animals. And a lot of times when I've been in these situations, I have leaned on animals and nature to really guide me through it and help me find solace and understanding. So in my paintings, I'm bringing those situations back to life and reliving them and kind of narrating them through my lens of how I experienced them, and using the animals that were significant to me at that time to depict those situations. So this is the first piece that I wanted to talk about. It's not actually in the show, but it's really important to me because it's the first piece that I created at the beginning of last fall. So it was the very first thing I did in senior capstone, and it came to me very naturally because I was fresh off of an experience where I felt like I had really trusted someone and been really vulnerable with them, and they kind of immediately abandoned me. And I reflected on that situation and realized that the time I had spent with that person felt so special and wonderful to me, and I was so open and allowed them to be a part of my life so quickly, and that I was being taken advantage of, and I had no awareness. So I felt like the vulture was a really good metaphor for that situation, because it's an animal that, first of all, I could see and encounter all across Davidson's campus, that kind of lingers and lurks, and that also mostly only eats creatures that are at their most vulnerable, that are literally dead and have no ability to defend themselves. So this is what my work kind of looked like throughout that first half of last fall semester. And I especially wanted to show this to show the transition of how my process changed through the 401 capstone course and into this semester. So this is essentially the same content that I reinvigorated into a new format because my process changed so much, and I really loved the content I was working with and wanted to see what would change about it if I used my new process. So before, I was using a lot of that thick, flat areas of paint. Everything felt very sectioned off, like it had its own place in the work, and now my work is much more alive and expressive, and the layers kind of have a relationship and speak back and forth to each other. So essentially I start out with really fluid, liquidy paint, pouring it and splashing it all over the canvas, really feeling that freedom and expression, and then I go and lay the structures and the figures over top of it. So you can see how the background is going right through the figure, and in this piece particularly, I love how kind of the red paint is giving that sense of bloodiness and guts, and it's bringing it all over the canvas, and so the whole canvas and the whole composition starts to speak more to the content and to the rawness and the vulnerability that I'm trying to depict in the work. So part of the way that I changed in my process and developed over time is through my drawing practice. So in my junior capstone particularly, my wonderful professor Tyler Starr started to take notice of how in my drawings I would use these really aggressive and fast marks and kind of draw really freely and have less of that focus on everything having a very specific structure. And then I was pushed more into the direction of exploring what happens when this negative space is colorful and has things going on, and then I draw on top of that. And so this is a drawing that I did, and it was just originally to experiment with composition, but you can see how in the experiments with the composition, there's these really interesting and unique looking forms. So this was a drawing, and it's inspired by a tarot card called the Death card, which is all about small deaths and how in our lives we go through so many little but really, really significant transitions. And this year I've been in a therapy process called EMDR, where you essentially kind of go back and explore all of your most traumatic memories and re-experience them to allow your brain to work back through it. So I decided to combine those two ideas and create this composition that features lots of the smaller deaths that I experienced, and then introduce some of the animals that were significant to me during that time. When I brought this into a painting, it took me forever to finish because something just kept not feeling right, and eventually I landed on this piece, which is one of the prominent ones displayed in the show that I'm so happy with. It features now a lot more of the healing processes that I use and a lot of the tools that I learned from those experiences, rather than focusing on the most traumatic elements of the experience. So I wanted to take a little cutting to talk more specifically about what is going on in this work titled Inner Child. So way down in the bottom right corner, there's this figure that is easily missed, but it's one of the earliest memories that I work with in my therapy process, where essentially I was having a snow day with my sister and her friend in our neighborhood, and I always felt excluded by them, and I wanted their attention so bad that I face planted into the snow, pretending that I was injured so that they would come over and show concern to me, and they didn't. And it's one of those small things that it seems so silly, but you look back and you remember it and you realize that was really important to me as a child, or else I probably wouldn't still even remember it today. And so that's kind of one of the places I started with my early experiences of how did I get this idea of abandonment and aloneness being something that is so bad for me, which then progresses into this figure that is representative of my experiences with assault and sexual violence. And there was a song that was introduced to me during that time period that talked about spiders. And so I included the spiders there, kind of representing the difficulty that she's experiencing. We then transition into the piebald squirrel, which is inspired by this squirrel that I saw one time on campus that has a bright white tail. And it was during a time where I was really struggling with feeling like I was special, and seeing a squirrel, which is such a mundane little creature with a bright white tail, made me realize that, like, even in the most mundane things, even if I am just a normal person and I live a very normal life, that doesn't mean I'm not also special when you take a closer look and when you get to know me. And I think that's true of everyone And then we transition into the piebald deer, which I don't know if y'all remember. If you're a senior, this would have been your sophomore year. There was this deer on campus that was like brown and white patches, which means it's piebald. And that was COVID semester, and so it was a really rough and really lonely time, and I lived in Knox, and I could look out my back window, and so often I could spot this super, super gorgeous creature. And so for me, it kind of came to represent my solitude at that time and finding inner peace when the outside world is just absolutely not what you want it to be. So in the past month, I've wanted to do something like this forever, but in my printmaking class, I finally got the opportunity to make an oracle card deck that complements this body of work. So oracle cards are similar to tarot, where you essentially pull a card and it has some sort of associated spiritual meaning. And I wanted to acknowledge that with these animals, their meanings, there are lots and lots and lots of cultures that have specific meanings that go with specific animals. And I think I'm absolutely influenced by lots of different cultures that I'm not necessarily a part of, especially Native American culture. So I wanted to acknowledge that some of the descriptions in my book particularly have influences from that direction, but I'm absolutely not from any of those cultures or practicing of any of those religions. And a lot of the things I'm talking about also come from my personal encounters with these animals. So for my oracle card, I wanted it to really each of them represent these specific encounters and meanings that I've developed over time. So as you can see, the piebald deer that was featured on the previous slide has a card. The blue heron is one of the earliest things for me. There was a blue heron that lived in the park by my house growing up that was really special to me and showed me that just because I had long, lanky legs didn't mean I couldn't be beautiful and independent and out on my own. And the red-tailed hawk is a really majestic creature that looks on at the campus from a distance and makes decisions and observes slowly and not quickly and with perspective. And this book is in there, and there's lots of more detailed descriptions if you want to pull a card and check out what you get. I also want to talk about this piece, Sunburn. It's really special to me because I started it during my junior capstone, and I knew that in its original form I really, really loved it, but that it just wasn't done and didn't fit into the body of work because it was more in my junior capstone style. And so I eventually got to revisit it after I traveled to California over winter break on my Abernathy grant. I had the absolute privilege of spending time in Joshua Tree, and there I observed this creature called the Anna's hummingbird, which I brought up. And the Anna's hummingbird is essentially, I did not exaggerate these colors at all. It has these really bright magenta and fuchsia and green feathers, and they will actually orient themselves specifically towards the sun as a mating ritual. So they will orient right towards the sun so they can attract a partner. And that made me think about all of the things that I do and all of the ways that I contort myself and present myself to try to attract someone. And I thought about this piece and how it's all about complete vulnerability and opening yourself up and immediately being ready to give your whole heart to someone. And I thought about how that's a really dangerous process for me, almost similar to what it would be like if I went out into the sun and stared into it with no sunscreen on because I just wanted to shine and glow and have somebody come to me. And so I combined those ideas and then used Skull Rock from Joshua Tree that I also got to do a live in-person drawing of that was really special and created this composition. Another piece that I wanted to talk about that particularly highlights another element of my work, which is humor, is this piece, Head Rush. So obviously, though these pieces have very serious content, there's a bit of a whimsy and a goofiness and a brightness in them. And I think a lot of what that's getting at for me is kind of the irony of how all these situations are really difficult and really bad, but I'm willingly putting myself in them over and over and over again. So it's a form of finding humor within myself and also pulling out tension in the work. So particularly in this one called Head Rush, the figure is hung upside down for her feet, and it's kind of a metaphor for when you're literally head over heels for someone. And because you're oriented that way, all the blood is rushed to your head, you're infatuated with them, and you can't think clearly. And there's almost a joy in being in that bad situation, and how confusing it is when you're in a bad dating relationship, but that dating relationship is also like the highlight of your day every day, trying to sift through all of that. And then she has the skunk in the bottom left corner, which is representative for me of needing to keep your guard up in a slow and calm and measured way, as the skunk does, with letting people know that, you know, if you get near it, it will spray you, and just showing those signs subtly rather than being an animal that attacks. As well as the raven, which is a very wise creature, and both of these creatures watching her and wondering, why are you just letting yourself stay in this situation? So that is the final piece that I wanted to talk about. I'll take questions now, and after questions, please feel free to go outside and get some cheese and crackers and juice, and then come into the gallery and ask me any more follow-up questions or anything else.
Talk a little bit about how you use your negative space in such an active manner, and what's like pushed you to go there from like a maybe like flat world, or like what's the psychological change in that?
Yeah, it's actually so fun because when I was in high school and I was just painting on my bedroom floor, I would do a lot of acrylic pours. I would do a lot of watering down acrylic paint and pouring it on the canvas and letting it flow. I always loved kind of the visuals and the weird fluidity and the way the paint just automatically blends together. And so it was really exciting when I started thinking about what happens if that comes back in. I was just feeling that the more thick paintings that didn't include that were getting stiff and kind of always looking the same and looking flat, and I just wasn't taking advantage of the texture of the paint and the weird things that it could do. It was almost as if I was having too much control over it. And as I was exploring, especially in printmaking and drawing, I wasn't as attached to that one way of working in either of those realms. And so the more I started to see it working really well in my printmaking, which there is some printmaking featured with my drawings in the show, but as it was working there, I started to think, what if I blew this up and I did it in the large scale? And so it was actually the inner child piece that was the first piece where I was like, I'll try this, I'll make a really different piece, and I'll just let the paint go. And then the first time I did it, I just fell in love with it, and I've kept doing it ever since.
Thank you.
Is there any reason like you specifically choose like which colors to use in which pieces? Because this one's more dark and some of them are more light.
Yeah, I think it kind of started out as a very intuitive process and something that I didn't put much thought into and was very automatic about, and sometimes that would really work out for me and other times it wouldn't. So I've started to try to look a little more intentionally at the color wheel and at the relationships between the colors, but I tend to think that it sometimes even starts in my drawings when I'm just thinking about what the images and what the things are that are in it, and typically I'll just look over at the drawing utensils I have and I'll just grab and I work from there.
How do you kind of like reconcile the emotion? Because I feel like that's so much of what this is. It's like, it's a pretty, I think, seem like working through pretty heavy emotions in a lot of ways, and like, I think balancing that with creative process can be a really hard thing, and like not letting one dominate. So, I mean, that's really a really good question, but just
Yeah, I think there's definitely also multiple answers to it. I think there were times, especially in the fall semester, where like I was just crying in the studio, and there were times where like inner child especially, I had to step away from that for a couple months because it was so personal and so intense and so complicated, and so I just couldn't really find the answers to it immediately and had to give it time and had to work through things. And I've been in therapy every single week for the entire time that I've been doing this show, so I think I have my spaces where I'm working through that and where a lot of my emotions go, and I'm keeping myself regulated. And I really encourage everybody to go to therapy because it's been amazing for me, and I think so much of this work is related to my therapy journey and comes from the way that I'm able to work through and see myself more honestly because I'm in therapy.
Do you have any pets that you said you had this relationship or kind of with nature and animals? I'm just wondering if you have any pets, whether at home or here or just kind of adopt them from afar like the deer.
Yes, well, I'll share two things. One of which is there's a piece that didn't get included, but it is in the cards, but there's this moth. And I was walking across campus one time and I found a moth with an injured wing. And I was devastated because it was such a beautiful creature, and it was like flopping around on the ground, like it couldn't fly anymore, and I knew its lifespan was short. And so I took it back to Armfield and I gave it an orange box, and I researched how to make a moth live, and I kept that moth alive for 3 days, which is good because their lifespan is 2 weeks. So that's one of my pets, and then I also do have a cat named Snickers, who I love very dearly.
Me? So obviously we've had a lot of classes together, and your growth is tremendous, both personally knowing you and also in your work. It's very much, I mean, you didn't show much of your old work, but it's like pretty straight up growth. Like, it's incredible to watch. What do you feel like if you were talking to Laura like 2 years ago, what would be like, no way, that's in the show? Or like, what do you feel like would surprise yourself 2 years ago most about your show?
I feel like what's funny to me is, so like I came into school with no real formal art training, and so I just didn't even conceptualize that there was another way of painting. Like when I went to the canvas, like it wasn't that I was like really stuck on, in some ways I was really stuck on this one way of working, but I just didn't even like think of or know how beautiful the work could be, especially I think my drawing and just going up with a tool. And like I was always a hater of my drawing and thought that it was terrible and thought I couldn't draw. So to have drawing be one of the primary things that's making my figures and forms in my show, I think I would have been very surprised by. Any final questions? And if there's any, yes?
I'll add one more. I've been beaming the whole time. My face hurts. I'm very, very happy to see this and hear you present in such a lovely way. That said, one of the things that I think has been hysterical in working with you is the transformation of certain animals. As they've come out, sometimes they've transformed into different things that has surprised you and me, and there's been this very kind of humorous moment in discovery through making that I think that sense of transformation is a pretty special process. I was wondering if you could share any of that with the group, that sense of transformation with animals, or an aha moment that you had that you think was pivotal or important.
Well, I will talk about Katie's favorite moment of transformation in my drawings. So there's one of the cards in the Oracle deck that you'll find that's related to one of the paintings. So I spent some time in Charleston, and there's an aquarium there that houses this injured eagle named Liberty. And I was just absolutely blown away to be in front of such a beautiful bird. I had never seen a bald eagle like several feet away from me before, and I would go to the aquarium and just spend a half an hour standing in front of Liberty. And I decided to make work about her, and she got injured from being tied up in power lines. So I was making these drawings of her tied up in the power lines, but I drew it kind of awkwardly and it looked like a duck. And there was just such an element of humor to the duck being caught in the power lines, and I honestly am much more like an injured duck than an injured eagle, and so in the final version of the work, which is Frog Farmer and is in there, there is a duck caught in the power lines that comes from that relationship with Liberty, but there are nice images of an eagle also in the Oracle card, so both versions exist in the show. Any final questions? Awesome. I wanted to thank you all so much again for coming. Please join us in the gallery, and if anyone has any one-on-one questions for me, I'd love to answer them in there.